Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Luke. And today we come to Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. The trouble with a familiar story is we think we all know it. Now, when I was growing up, the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, was a staple for Sunday school teachers. The trouble is that you don't really take much away from it, except that Jesus likes going to a rather small men's house for tea. Now, the problem with that is you miss the surprising element of the story. Talking of surprises, when my mother turned 70, we had a series of surprises lined up for her. Firstly, we managed to smuggle her present into the house, so it's a complete surprise when she saw it on her birthday morning. The second thing was my brother, who was very busy visiting churches in his role within the church, was able to pop down for her birthday and join the rest of the family that were already there, and that was a great surprise to her. And lastly, we managed to arrange a tea at a friend's, and Mum, being unusually gullible, fell for it. She just thought she was going around to see a friend for tea, and of course all her friends were there. Well, the background to this story is very, very surprising. Zacchaeus is a tax collector. Tax collectors were not popular. They were collecting taxes for the Romans, who were an occupying force. With that, they didn't have a wage, so they used to put a percentage on top of the tax they collected. And from what we can tell, they weren't always too scrupulous about it. But Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus. But no one's going to give this small guy a break. You can imagine all the crowds are in front of him. They're not going to let the most unpopular man in the town to the front of the crowd. But he's absolutely determined. And in verse 4 we read, "So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way." I don't know what he knew about Jesus, but his behaviour is very interesting. Firstly, he ran. You didn't do that if you were a man of some importance in the ancient Near East. And you certainly didn't climb trees. So whatever he knew about Jesus, maybe he heard a bit about his teaching or the miracles, he was determined to see him. But then we get the series of surprises. Jesus stops and looks up. Verse 5, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. That was a big surprise. I suppose if you'd asked Zacchaeus beforehand, what do you think the chances of that happening are? He'd say, no, Jesus is going to stay with someone far more important than me and far more popular. But Jesus wants to stay with him. The second surprise is this: the people are surprised. Verse 7, all the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." As I said, tax collectors weren't popular and they weren't particularly honest either. But then we get another surprise, the third surprise. Verse 8, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Lord, look, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount." What did I say about tax collectors being dishonest? Well, Zacchaeus owns up to it, doesn't he? But he goes beyond what the law required if you owed someone anything. And half of his riches to the poor. The man was really putting things out. It's a genuine reaction, isn't it? It's a reaction of someone who truly wants to put things right where Jesus is concerned. Now, the fourth surprise is quite amazing, and I'm going to unpack it a bit. It's Jesus' reaction to all this. Verse 9, Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham." Now there's a bit more going on here than him saying he's a Jew like Abraham. Abraham was notable for being someone who displayed real faith where God was concerned. And what Jesus is saying here is Zacchaeus is displaying real faith where God is concerned, where Jesus is concerned. He is acting like a descendant of Abraham. He's sort of showing this family resemblance. And here's the biggest surprise of all, what Jesus says to conclude this story. Verse 10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." It's God's work, not ours. Let's just go back to what the Bible says about Abraham and his faith. Well, we can find that in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6. It says this, "Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness." Do you notice that word, credited? It wasn't that he earned it. It doesn't say he earned God's favour and that made him righteous. No, it was credited. And it's interesting to note that in the letter of James, he uses that same example as he writes to Christians in the early church. You see, in the end, it's grace that shows God's favour. God is a missionary God. He reaches out to us. Any other religion will tell you how to find God, and there may be steps by which you are to approach God. But hey, think about it a second. If God is truly great, holy, which means set apart, how can we, as people who fail, reach him? What can we do? There's nothing, is there? God is the God who reaches out. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. God finds us if we'll let him, not we find God. Thank you so much for listening.